Tens of thousands of Canadians have been forced to evacuate their homes due to wildfires in recent days, and many others have felt the effects of wildfire smoke hanging over their communities. The unprecedented wildfire season has some Canadians considering whether to move out of harm's way altogether to avoid either of those scenarios in the future. That's according to a new survey by the Angus Reid Institute. For more, we're joined by Shachi Kurl. She's the president of the Angus Reid Institute. Thanks so much for making time for us today.
Thanks for having me, Jacqueline.
So, first of all, in terms of how concerned Canadians are about these conditions, what did you find?
Well, I mean, look, I think what is frankly almost unprecedented about these data when we went and canvassed Canadians about what's been going on this summer is just the almost unanimous number who report being affected by wildfires or wildfire smoke, or basically the impacts of wildfires this summer. So 88%, nearly 9 in 10 say that they have been affected in one way or the other. And when you think about what holds Canadians together in terms of 90% all saying that they've been through a similar thing, it is so high, it is so unusual, it is so unprecedented, but in many ways it makes sense. You know, you're in Toronto, I'm here in BC. Year after year, we do tend to see Western Canada in particular, British Columbia, the North, maybe sometimes Atlantic Canada, more rural areas affected by wildfire smoke. But this year was so different in that for the first time, you know, Toronto was dealing with the air quality problems that we deal with on an almost annual basis in the summer. And so it really does speak to the fact that there's no running from, or there's no hiding from the impacts of wildfires, and urban Canada, particularly central Canada, got a good dose of that this year.
And yet you did find that some people are trying to figure that out. Is that a possibility? Can you get away from it?
Indeed, and so young people themselves, nearly a quarter of 18 to 34-year-olds are saying to us that they would think about moving away if there is a place to move away to. If there is a place to be safe from the impacts of wildfire smoke, they are all in on that idea. At least a quarter of them are. That's the highest among any age demographic, and it's a pretty critical mass of people when we think about how many in our population demographics belong to Gen Z or our early or younger millennials. Of course, the challenge is, and it's maybe a little bit easier when you're between the ages of 18 to 34 to think about your mobility. You can move more easily. You might be more inclined to move for work or for other reasons. And so wildfire smoke might also be a reason to give pause and say, well, maybe I don't want to be in an area that is constantly and chronically in the wildfire zone. And whether that's the Okanagan, Kelowna, BC, that area, or other parts of the country that sort of chronically on a year after year annual basis are affected. These communities are affected by wildfire smoke. But to your point, this year, Northwest Territories fires were having an impact in places that had never experienced it before. So the broader question of can you get away from it, I think, is a more open question and very much subject to factors and circumstances that we may not have a lot of control over, such as which way the wind is blowing.
Yeah.
That said, there's a lot of people who are saying we need to get more control over why we're having these wildfires.
Well, yeah, and that, Shachi, I wondered, you know, with so many people feeling the impact of this, I mean, with your numbers, 90% of Canadians feeling that, is that going to influence how people are feeling about action being taken about climate change, you know, feeling the need to put some more pressure maybe on politicians, or maybe getting involved themselves in order to try to reduce the impact that it's having?
Right, and such an interesting question at a time where we're also seeing politicians pushing back on increased carbon taxes or out and out campaigning on a promise to scrap carbon taxation or carbon pricing. You know, what's interesting in all of this is the broader question over whether climate change is even real and generally human caused, and what to do in terms of taking action, are 2 points or 2 areas where we're not seeing a lot of movement. So what's notable is that the number of people in this country, which is the vast majority, by the way, the 2/3 who say that climate change is real and it's caused primarily by humans, has remained stock still. We haven't seen an uptick in that as yet. The number of Canadians who say that climate change is real, but it's caused by natural factors, not by humans or by emissions caused by humans, that number has remained constant, and so is the number of people who are saying that climate change is a theory, it's not proven, it's not a fact. That still stands at about 7 to 10%, depending on who you talk to in this country. So maybe the knock-on effects in terms of opinions and how we see the direct link or correlation, if one exists, between the fires and our own perceptions of climate change, we're not necessarily seeing a spike in the number of people who are saying that climate change is real and we have to take action. The majority have been saying so for some years. The majority continue to say so, but it's not as though the impacts of this summer have won over any doubters or any deniers.